The air over the tarmac was still heavy with the scent of jet fuel and rain. Faint puddles reflected the dim gold of late afternoon light scattered across concrete that had weathered more than just a storm. In the distance, a KC-135 approached, low and slow, its wide body cutting through the mist like something reluctant to return. No one spoke. Not on the tower radio. Not on the ground. Crews who had finished their missions stood in quiet clusters, helmets and hand boots planted, all eyes fixed on the descending aircraft. The wheels touched down so gently the sound barely reached the control room. The plane rolled forward, centered in its lane, its engines winding down in a long, deliberate hush. There was no applause, no salute, no voice breaking the air. But they watched. Every technician, every pilot, every officer on the ground watched this one woman bring her aircraft home. She didn't make a show of it. The plane came to a stop. The lights on the pad flickered as if the storm had taken one final breath. She powered down systems with quiet precision, moved through her checklist like it was any other day. Then the hatch opened. Callie stepped down the ladder one slow rung at a time. Her boots met the wet pavement with barely a sound. The wind shifted her collar, but she didn't fix it. Nobody moved toward her at first. They simply stood unsure if what they had just seen even had a name. No ceremony, no drama. But something had happened here. And everyone knew it. They just didn't know how to say it. Not yet. Because this wasn't the beginning of her story. This was the end of a chapter only a few had witnessed. The rest were about to learn why they could no longer overlook the quietest pilot on the field. Part 1. Introducing the simple woman, Callie Dunn. At 37, Callie Dunn had the kind of presence most people overlooked. Not because she was forgettable, but because she never asked to be seen. Her hair was always tied back with purpose, her uniform crisp, but never showy, her boots clean but not polished for attention. She walked like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Most days her words came slow and measured, shaped more by intent than instinct. In a profession where noise often won the room, Callie's silence made people uncomfortable. She had spent 19 years in the Air Force, and not once had she missed a deadline, an inspection, or a procedural check. Her evaluations were impeccable. But when promotion boards or new mission slots came up, her name rarely rose to the surface. It wasn't that she lacked ability. It was that her kind of ability didn't draw a spotlight. She didn't tell stories in the break room or raise her hand first in group briefings. She showed up early, prepared quietly, and left without making a trail of words behind her. Callie had grown up in central Kansas, the middle child of a farming family where storms came without warning and engines had to be rebuilt by hand. Her father, a mechanic and Navy veteran, had taught her how to hold a socket wrench before she could read a schematic. He'd say, "If your hands shake in still air, they'll fail you in wind." Those words stuck with her more than she realized at the time. When other kids bragged about varsity letters or scholarships, Callie was learning how to find oil leaks with just the smell of metal. She didn't mind being different. In fact, she found peace in knowing she was building something no one could take away. At flight school, her instructors noticed she never rushed a checklist. Some said it with praise, others with irritation. But she earned top marks in systems reliability and emergency recovery. What she lacked in speed, she made up for in control. Control was her currency, not just in the cockpit, but in life. She moved with a kind of patience that didn't need defending. By the time she joined aerial refueling teams, Callie already knew she wasn't built for fanfare, but she was built for endurance. The long, cold hours at 30,000 feet, the calculations, the communication protocols, the ability to stay level in more ways than one. Other pilots joked that she made flying look like math homework. They didn't realize that's what made her dangerous. She didn't need adrenaline. She needed numbers, rhythm, and precision. She rarely corrected people who misunderstood her quiet for timidity. Instead, she let time do the talking. Time always did. Because while others burned hot and bright, she remained steady. Callie never competed to be first in line. She waited until the line fell apart. Then she picked up what was left and finished what others started. Her quarters on base were simple. No decorations on the wall, no photographs on the desk, just a folded flight manual, a laminated fuel flow chart, and a pen she always kept capped. She read more than she spoke. She listened more than she explained. And when things went wrong, people often turned to louder voices first. That never bothered her. If anything, she expected it. But it did shape how she carried herself. Not resentful, just prepared. Prepared to be overlooked, prepared to be doubted, but never unprepared for the mission. Because in her mind, the job wasn't about being seen. It was about doing it right, especially when no one else could. That belief shaped every decision she made. It was why she showed up early to briefings, why she reviewed weather charts twice, why she stayed late in hangars not because someone told her to, but because something told her she should. Callie didn't call attention to herself. She didn't raise her voice when decisions seemed unfair. She waited. She observed. And she kept moving. She understood that in flight the quietest corrections saved lives. A gentle nudge on a rudder, a half-second adjustment to airspeed. The smallest choices could keep a jet stable or send it spiraling. That truth followed her everywhere. And while others in her unit sought credit, Callie chased clarity. Because in her world, clarity meant control, and control meant survival. She was not the most popular pilot. She was not the one others toasted in the bar after a mission, but she was the one who read through the manual at midnight just to check one more data point before sleeping. And when the sky turned gray, she didn't panic. She recalculated. That was Callie Dunn. Quiet, simple, steady, the kind of woman people rarely talked about, until the day they had to. Part 2, Left Behind, Before the Storm. Sub, Part 2.1, The Briefing That Left Her Out. The briefing room was too bright, the kind of fluorescent light that made everything feel sterile and temporary. Pilots filled the rows in flight suits that still smelled like jet oil and adrenaline, most of them talking in clipped tones, tapping pens, or trading quiet jokes. Callie sat near the end of the second row posture, straight hands folded over her notebook. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't need to. She already knew the entire mission flow from memory. A digital screen flickered at the front of the room, pulling everyone's eyes forward. The lead operations officer began calling out assignments. Primary refuel slot, tactical escort window, strike group routing. Names followed roles like clockwork. When Captain Mercer's name appeared next to KC-135 Alpha, a few heads nodded. No one questioned it. Fast hands, fast decisions, a favorite for high-tempo missions. Then another name blinked onto the screen. KC-135 Charlie, support slot, non-essential, Callie Dunn. The word sat there for a full second longer than it needed to. Non-essential. Her co-pilot glanced at her, then looked down again. No one else reacted. Her name was acknowledged the way background noise is noticed and dismissed. No one turned toward her. No one explained the change. There had been talk of shared slots, joint coverage, but now there was no shared anything. Just a new label. The ops lead moved on without pause. They never said she was too slow. They never said she didn't belong. They didn't have to. The assignment said it all. The air in the room didn't change, but something in it had cooled. A soft chuckle rose from a few rows ahead when someone joked about the real mission needing more than just checklist warriors. She didn't respond. One of the strike pilots leaned sideways in his chair and whispered something sharp enough to earn a laugh. She heard it just barely. Something about not clogging the sky with backups. Her pen stayed still in her lap. She didn't write a single note. The screen moved to emergency routing, alternate land zones, turbulence markers, radio dead zones. She kept her eyes forward the entire time. When the ops board reset, her name disappeared. No final mention, no confirmation, just gone. The meeting ended with the scrape of boots against tile and a flood of voices rising like static. Pilots reached for flight tablets, passed around clipped remarks, and filed out in loose pairs. None of them looked her way. Callie stood smooth the edge of her jacket and stepped out of the room as if her presence had never registered. The hallway outside was quiet. The wind pushed faintly through a loading bay door left cracked open. She didn't flinch. She didn't look back. She just walked steady and silent toward the plane that no one expected her to fly. Sub Part 2.2, Quiet Exit. Callie stepped through the door without a sound, the latch clicking gently behind her as the voices from the briefing room faded away. The hallway was dim and empty, lit only by a flickering ceiling panel and the gray wash of daylight pushing in from the far end. Her boots moved evenly across the polished floor, each step steady, each breath measured. Outside, the wind came in sharp across the tarmac, pushing against her like it had been waiting. The sky hung low, swollen with pale clouds that offered no warmth. She paused just long enough to adjust her collar, folding it cleanly back into place with 2 fingers. No one followed her. No one called out. The door stayed closed behind her like it hadn't let anyone through at all. She turned toward the edge of the base where her aircraft sat idle near the maintenance hangar. Its silver body caught no light, just dull reflections of an overcast sky. A few techs moved in the distance, but no one looked in her direction. Her hand brushed along the strap of her flight bag. She didn't grip it tighter. She didn't shift her pace. She just walked, like nothing had changed. The cold touched her cheeks and traced along the edge of her jaw. She blinked once and kept moving. Each footfall was soft, absorbed by the damp concrete and the silence it carried. There was no anger in her eyes, no flicker of defiance, only that calm, fixed focus she wore like armor. Wind tugged at the ends of her hair where it had slipped loose beneath her cap. She didn't reach to fix it. Instead, she walked into the wind with her gaze straight ahead. The hangar loomed larger as she approached. Her aircraft sat near the corner, quiet and waiting, its ladder still stowed, its systems untouched. It looked like a thing forgotten. But she hadn't forgotten, and that mattered. The door to the operations bay hissed shut behind someone else. She didn't turn. The sound barely registered. Her hands remained loose at her sides. One more gust passed through the space between buildings. She narrowed her eyes, not in irritation but in recognition. The weather didn't bother her. It just confirmed what she already knew. This was not a warm place, not for her, not today. And still she walked toward her plane with the same quiet purpose she'd carried since morning. Because walking away didn't mean giving up. Not for her. Not ever. Part 3, she prepares anyway. The interior of the hangar was cold, but still. Rows of equipment lined the far walls, their shapes quiet under overhead lights that buzzed faintly. Callie walked across the concrete floor without pause, her flight bag resting against her hip boots, leaving damp prints behind her. Her KC-135 sat near the edge of the bay, tucked just far enough into shadow that it felt apart from the others. The ladder had already been lowered. The crew had done their part hours ago and moved on. She climbed slowly, each rung familiar beneath her hands. At the top she paused and looked into the cockpit like she was greeting something living. Then she stepped inside and placed her bag on the seat beside her. The controls were dark. The air carried the scent of cold metal and memory. She reached for the side panel and flipped a single switch, just enough to bring the displays to life. Soft green lights blinked on, illuminating the throttle and instrument array. She didn't touch anything else. Not yet. From her bag she pulled out a slim binder and set it neatly on her lap. Each tab was color-coded. Every page had small, handwritten notes in fine, deliberate lines. She began at the beginning, not halfway through, not where it was convenient. Every step had a reason, and she moved through them without skipping. Cabin pressure settings, fuel temperature tolerance, engine start protocol. She traced each item with her finger before reading it again. It wasn't habit, it was discipline. There was a difference. She flipped to the emergency fuel transfer section and paused. Her eyes scanned the sequence even though she already knew it by heart. Then she reached for the laminated chart she kept folded and aligned it beside the checklist. Red markers showed maximum flow limits. A blue line indicated the minimum temperature band for pressure reliability. She ran her fingertip along the chart, stopping at a note she had written months ago after a test drill had gone wrong. She adjusted the altitude offset in her notes by 200 feet. She tabbed the change in yellow. Then she checked the same line again. Outside the cockpit, the wind pushed against the aircraft's body, but she didn't look up. The storm hadn't started yet, but the sky was already unsettled. She moved to the next page. Boom deployment calibration, manual override test, pressure cycle warm-up. One by one, she reviewed every function. She didn't just scan the list. She spoke each line to herself silently with full intent. The cockpit was still. Only the quiet hum of standby systems kept her company. That, and the voice of her father from years ago. He used to say, "You don't prepare for when things go right. You prepare for when everything falls apart." That's what readiness really means. She remembered standing in a barn as a teenager holding a stripped-down carburetor while a thunderstorm rattled the roof. Her dad had shown her how to rebuild it slowly, piece by piece, even though the storm would pass before the truck ever left the garage. Back then, she hadn't understood why it mattered. Now she did. Readiness wasn't about the likelihood of use. It was about the responsibility of carrying something through, no matter the odds, no matter the silence that followed. She reached across to test the comm switch. The light blinked once, then settled. She made a note on the checklist and moved on. Each system responded as expected. No anomalies, no drama. But she logged it all exactly as she'd been trained to, and exactly as she expected herself to. The aircraft felt calm around her, not passive, not cold, just present, waiting. She reviewed the final tab twice. Once forward, once backward. Then she closed the binder and rested both hands on the edge of the panel in front of her. Nothing she had just done would be seen by anyone else. No officer would commend it. No peer would notice. But that was never the point. The point was that she would be ready even when no one asked her to be. She placed the binder in her flight bag and zipped it shut. The lights in the cockpit dimmed slightly as power cycled down. Outside, a low gust of wind passed over the roof. She sat still for a moment longer, not waiting, just present. Then she stood and stepped back down the ladder, her boots meeting the concrete without sound. The storm hadn't arrived. But if it did, she knew she wouldn't need to scramble. She had already done what needed to be done, and no one could take that from her. Part 4. When the Sky Turns on Them. Sub. Part 4.1. The Real Storm Begins. The sky had turned from gray to something darker, something restless. Sleet tapped against the cockpit glass of the lead refueling aircraft as it climbed to the transfer window. Inside systems blinked green, but the boom wouldn't lock. Captain Mercer's voice came over comms, tight and clipped. "Boom arms icing. We've got no contact." A second later, a fighter waved off. Controllers scrambled on the ground. Alternate patterns were checked. Nothing was available in time. Wind shear hit the lead tanker again, knocking it just enough to break another connection attempt. The mission clock ticked louder than the static. Each second lost meant fewer gallons, less margin. One of the F-22 pilots cut in low and fast, read on time, 2 minutes to bingo fuel. There was no reply at first, just background noise, muffled voices overlapping decisions, keyboards being hit too fast. Then came the call to hold current vector, wait for alternate solution. The alternate didn't exist. All other tankers were too far or already on secondary assignments. Every radar sweep confirmed the same. The refueling corridor was collapsing. Turbulence hit again, this time hard. The KC-135 rattled as Mercer called out cylinder freeze. They couldn't hold steady position anymore. The cold had gotten into the gear. One fighter called to divert. Another asked for timing on next viable window. There was no window. Not soon enough. The fighters couldn't make the loop without fuel. Controllers reviewed coastlines. Greenland too far. Turn the formation now. Mission fail. All of it gone. Hours of planning, coordination, teamwork. All on the edge of being scrubbed. The screen in the tower pulsed with red and amber alerts. Controllers stopped talking over each other. That was always the worst sign. The shift into silence meant no one had a plan. A storm cell moved closer. You could see it rolling across the upper cloud deck. Not violent yet, but building. Wind patterns grew uneven. The fighters dropped to conserve speed. One more transmission came through, brief, tired. "This isn't going to hold. We need fuel now." The storm hadn't fully arrived, but the mission was already shaking. Every voice in the room knew what was coming, and no one had anything left to say. Subpart 4.2. One voice steps up. Callie sat in her cockpit radio silent checklist still open beside her. She had been monitoring the comms the whole time, listening as turbulence cracked through the formation and the lead tanker failed one attempt after another. No one had said her name. The words non-essential hadn't left the mission board. They had just become quieter, folded into every skipped glance and every decision made without her. But the air in her headset was changing, filling with pressure instead of orders. She heard the fatigue in the controller's voice, the hesitation, the quiet panic riding under the surface. No new solution was coming. She reached forward and keyed the mic. Her voice was steady, clear. "This is Charlie 2-1. My airframe is clean. I can take the slot." A pause followed long enough to let her know it surprised them. She waited. She didn't repeat it. She didn't need to. Then a crackle came back. "Confirm ability to proceed solo into turbulence and recover refuel slot." Her reply was simple. "I confirm." Her co-pilot turned to look at her. His hand hovered near the manual override. She didn't look back. Just told him to push the data and prep the track. He did as told. No questions, no jokes, no time. She adjusted the cabin pressure dial with one clean motion, then brought the engine response up by 1%. The aircraft responded like it had been waiting. Outside, the wind pulled at the edge of the nose as she angled left. She turned 15 degrees to port and dropped into the lower edge of the corridor. The clouds ahead thickened, stitched together by a soft gray light that had no beginning or end. She didn't hesitate. She just moved into it like it was routine. The air started to shake. The first edge of the storm pressed into the wing. Rain streaked across the window in sharp lines. She checked the boom controls, toggled the radio to approach sync, and relayed her bearing. Charlie 2-1 now assuming refuel slot. Then she said nothing more. No one had asked her to fix the mission. They hadn't even remembered she was here. But now, they followed her track. Screens back on the ground lit up again. Her transponder pinged. F-22s shifted in the corridor to align with her path. She didn't react. She flew. Her hands moved across the controls with precision, not performance. The sky outside grew darker. Inside, her panel lights glowed green, all systems steady. And for the first time since that morning, the silence that surrounded her didn't mean exclusion. It meant trust. It meant they were watching, not because she asked them to, but because there was no one else left to follow. Part 5. Precision. Inside the Chaos Sub. Part 5.1. Precision under pressure. Rain moved across the windshield in fast, uneven lines. The sky beyond was a wall of gray, thick and shifting, with flashes of light blinking through like distant warnings. Inside the KC-135, the only sound was the low hum of systems and the occasional soft click of a switch under Callie's hand. She adjusted the trim, compensating for the rising turbulence on the right wing. One small input at a time. The aircraft held its line. The first F-22 called in range. Its signal flickered across her secondary screen, closing fast from below cloud cover. She didn't answer with words. She toggled the boom console and watched the systems align. The radar confirmed proximity. She gave one calm order to reduce airspeed by 0.5. The fighter adjusted instantly, sliding into position like a shadow coming home. Outside, lightning cracked wide to the north, throwing the horizon into sudden white. The KC-135 rocked slightly, but Callie made no correction yet. She waited for the movement to complete, then fine-tuned the heading by a half degree. Her fingers moved across the controls like they'd done this before, not rushed, not rehearsed, just right. The boom extended. The fighter drifted forward, its nose steady. She aligned the tip with care, nudging the throttle gently as wind clawed at the tail. Connection. The light blinked green. Fuel began to flow. Her co-pilot whispered a number as the gauge ticked upward. She didn't reply. Her eyes stayed locked on the readings. Outside, the clouds twisted again, tighter now. The second fighter was already in view, forming up behind the first. The lead peeled off to the right, clean and controlled, sliding out of the way like a door opening. She called the new position. Maintain current altitude. Confirm angle. Deploying boom. The aircraft jolted as a crosswind swept across the fuselage. Her left hand adjusted thrust. Her right made a small pitch correction. The line stabilized. Another green light. Second lock confirmed. Fuel transferred. She didn't shift in her seat. She didn't wipe the sweat forming at her brow. Her focus didn't break. The cockpit lights flickered once as a fresh burst of turbulence pushed through the cabin. She had already accounted for it. No correction needed. The third fighter called in with more urgency. Airspeed was near the limit. He came in low, then rose too fast. She countered with a 2-degree yaw shift, smoothing the join. He dropped again. She moved nothing. Instead, she waited until the drift corrected itself. Then locked the boom. Fuel flowed, quiet, exact. The storm outside screamed at the edges of the jet. Rain wrapped the windows in sheets. But inside, everything stayed clean. Her voice gave the next instruction. Match glide, reduce pitch, prepare to hold vector. There was no shaking in her tone, no stress in her breath. She flew the jet like it was wired to her pulse. The radar blinked again. Fourth fighter inbound. But she didn't look at it yet. She was still finishing the current pass. Only once the gauge confirmed full transfer did she give the command to retract. The boom pulled back. Light turned yellow. Transfer complete. Her co-pilot exhaled, barely audible. She said nothing, just adjusted the controls and waited for the next plane to find its place in the sky. The pressure outside was rising, but inside Callie Dunn was calm. The storm could rage all it wanted. She wasn't flying for peace. She was flying for precision. Part 5.2, The Final Connection. The fourth fighter was holding back just outside the approach arc. The radar showed him trailing farther than expected, his signal blinking slower than it should. Callie didn't need the numbers to know he was nearly out of time. The storm had thickened around them. Lightning flashed directly above the nose, and thunder rolled a second later low and wide. The aircraft shook, but her hands didn't move. She toggled the boom console again. Systems stayed green, but the margin was gone. There wouldn't be time for another try. The fighter pilot's voice came through the headset barely above a whisper. Riding red line on flow, coming in light, he sounded younger than the others. She responded with only what was needed. Hold vector, maintain glide. I have you. He dropped too low. The tail pitched slightly under turbulence. She adjusted her own angle by a fraction and rebalanced the left engine's thrust. The gap closed, 1 meter, then half. Wind slammed into the KC-135 from the right side sharp and fast. She made one input, not dramatic, just enough to keep the wings level. The fighter drifted again, nose high, too unstable. She didn't warn him. She didn't ask for more. She adjusted the boom position manually and matched his wobble with calm precision. Another flash lit the sky outside the cockpit. White light flooded everything for half a second, then disappeared into gray. The boom tip found its mark. The lock clicked. Fuel began to flow. Inside the cockpit, her co-pilot was silent. His eyes stayed on the gauges, watching the needle rise in careful ticks. The fighter didn't speak at first. He held position, shaking slightly in the turbulence. Callie compensated without words, holding him steady like it was instinct. Then softly his voice returned. She brought us home. She said nothing. The fuel light turned green. Transfer confirmed. She retracted the boom and throttled down 2%, stabilizing airspeed for exit formation. The storm hadn't let up. The radar still pulsed with noise. But for the first time in an hour, the corridor held. The pilot peeled away, heading west with the others. His transponder faded from her display, replaced by silence. In her headset, control called the final log. All aircraft refueled. Mission complete. She acknowledged with 2 words, returning base. She didn't lean back. She didn't exhale in relief. She stayed locked in hands, still where they'd been for the past hour. Outside, lightning cracked again, followed by the long hush of rain against the fuselage. The cabin lights dimmed, then reset. She guided the KC-135 east, flying through the last edge of the storm. The jet rolled once gently. She didn't react. She had already accounted for the drift. The screen next to her showed fuel totals for each of the 4 fighters, all topped off, all done without delay, 0 corrections logged. The mission had survived, not because it had been rescued, but because it had been executed with control. Callie stared ahead into the fading storm. She didn't need applause. She didn't need anyone to say what they already knew. She had flown the plane exactly as it needed to be flown, and that was enough. Part 6, The Silent Return. The clouds had thinned by the time Callie reached the coastline. The worst of the storm was behind her, but its weight still clung to the sky. Below, the airbase came into view, calm and washed clean by the rain. She began her descent with the same precision she had carried through every step of the mission. No sharp turns, no sudden adjustments, just steady, deliberate flight. The runway stretched ahead, damp but clear. Her landing gear lowered with a soft whir. The KC-135 touched down smooth and centered, as if the sky had never threatened to break it. She taxied toward the assigned lane, engine sound low and even. The other aircraft had already returned their crews, long debriefed. Only hers remained in motion. Along the edge of the tarmac, people had started to gather. Not in formation, not by order, just in small clusters, still in flight suits, eyes following her path. She powered down the systems one by one, the cockpit going quiet around her. No one spoke. Not her co-pilot, not the ground team on comms. Silence was the only sound. She removed her headset and placed it in the cradle, then unbuckled, stood, and walked to the hatch. The ladder was already waiting. She stepped out into the wind without hesitation. The cool air brushed her face, catching loose strands of hair beneath her cap. She didn't fix them. Her boots met the concrete wet from the last pass of rain. She paused only long enough to glance toward the tower. Dozens of faces were watching from the windows. But no one moved. Until one technician stepped forward, then another. No one said anything. The first to reach her was a junior crew member, someone she didn't know by name. He didn't speak. He just extended his hand. She took it, Brief, firm. More followed. A fuel systems tech, an avionics specialist, 2 pilots from another squadron. One by one they formed a quiet line. No ceremony, no applause, just hands reaching out, each grip carrying something unspoken, respect, relief, maybe even regret. She accepted them all, calm, grounded, not surprised, not moved to tears, just present. The squadron commander emerged from the operations building last. Earlier that morning he hadn't looked at her twice. He had spoken to other crews, assigned trust to other names. Now he stopped 2 steps in front of her, helmet tucked under one arm, his jaw set like he was holding something heavier than words. He raised his hand and gave her a full, proper salute. Then he said it plainly. "She's the reason we're all standing here." No one responded. No one needed to. The air between them held the weight of what she had done. He turned and looked toward the others. Pilots, engineers, controllers, everyone who had seen the mission come apart and watched her hold it together. "That's your new standard," he said. Still, no one clapped. But something shifted. A long-held assumption had cracked, and in its place stood the quiet truth. Callie didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply let it settle. Her aircraft rested behind her, steam rising faintly from the cooling engines. The boom was locked and clean folded beneath the tail like it had never been deployed. Her co-pilot remained back by the hatch, watching from a distance. He didn't say much anymore. When she finally turned to leave, her boots moved with the same calm rhythm as always. But the silence that followed her wasn't the same. It wasn't dismissal. It was acknowledgement. Not loud, not broadcast, but felt, deep and clear. Because in the end, there was no way to write the story of that day without her name at its center. And not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. Callie Dunn never raised her voice. She didn't push for recognition, didn't chase it down, and never tried to outshine the noise around her. She simply showed up prepared and did her job with the kind of focus most people overlook until it saves their life. She didn't volunteer to prove anyone wrong. She didn't step in because she was angry or needed a win. She stepped in because something needed doing, and she knew she could do it right. That kind of strength doesn't come from wanting attention. It comes from knowing who you are and trusting that being ready matters more than being noticed. She flew through the storm with hands that didn't shake and a mind that never drifted. In a world full of fast answers and loud opinions, she chose process over performance, clarity over credit, not because it was easy, but because it was right. When others hesitated, she moved. When systems failed, she adapted, and when no one expected her to rise, she had already done the work to stand steady. What Callie taught wasn't about bravery in the loudest sense. It was about the kind of courage that runs deep, quiet, and steady, built from every unnoticed decision that came before it. She didn't need applause. Because power doesn't always look like command. Sometimes it looks like silence. A silence filled with purpose. She reminded everyone that stillness isn't weakness. It's preparation. It's strength held in reserve until the moment calls for it. And when that moment came, she didn't ask for the room to turn toward her. She just flew. Being unseen doesn't mean being unworthy. It means being ready when no one else is. If her story moved, you share it with someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength is still strength, and that the calmest voice in the room might be the one holding everything together.